Hey everyone, you're listening to Ankur Warikoo on Woice with Warikoo. On this podcast, I talk to you about entrepreneurship, how to grow in life, manage personal finances, handle failures, and a lot more things that just come to my mind. The episode begins. I'm recording this podcast sitting outside in nature. So if you hear birds chirping, if you hear rain, if you hear water, then you should know that I'm very happy where I am. And I hope that doesn't make you envious, but tells you that you could also be making that choice sooner than later. So this podcast episode is about judgment. It's about one of the most powerful quotes I had read very early on and stayed with me. And it struck me that I could speak about this today because I just about 30 minutes back sent out this tweet that is getting viral and possibly will reach a lot of people. And the tweet said that just because someone has a job, just because someone works 9 to 5, just because someone gets a salary, does not make them less ambitious, does not make them less capable, definitely does not make them less cool. And this is pointed to largely the Twitter community, where, especially in Twitter India, almost everyone seems to be making a startup. Everyone seems to be either working in one or starting on their own. And there is this tribe, there is this community, this sense of belonging, that if you're not working in a startup or you don't have your own startup, you're not cool. That you have sold your soul, that you've become a slave to the corporate world, that you're now married to that 9 to 5 job, and the salary is your drug, and all those things. And I often wonder, why do people behave that way? Like, what about people gets them to form these communities, these tribes in their head, and then begin to diss on people who don't belong to that community? And it largely stems from the fact that people in general struggle to make sense of the world. The world is a very complex place. The world is immensely, immensely complex. It has so many nuances, but the human mind is not meant to deal with all those nuances, meant to deal with all those complexities. So what it tries to do is it tries to break down that complexity and make it something reasonable and simplistic to understand. There's this beautiful wave of air that just swept by me. And I hope that gets delivered on the podcast, because then you can close your eyes and just imagine where I'm sitting. And I wish I could describe it, but I have blue water in front of me, I have greenery around me, I have birds chirping, I have trees, I have shrubs, I have bushes. But I don't want to deviate and distract. So coming back to the message, we can't make sense of the world, as complex as that is, and that's why we try to simplify that. And the best form of simplification is what's called categorization. And that is also what forms the basis for generalization. We tend to generalize things because that helps us explain the world and rationalize the world. So if we see someone who is a certain color, we begin to generalize them. If we see someone with a certain amount of money, we generalize them. If we see someone wearing a certain attire, we generalize them. If we hear someone speaking a certain way, we generalize them, because that becomes our normal way of extrapolating the limited data sets that we have, and then just extending that to the entire universe of people who fall in that category. And that's the same thing we do when it comes to this particular example as well. You're running a startup and you suddenly feel that everyone around you is from the startup community. You're thinking about fundraising, you're thinking about product market fit, you're thinking about getting customer traction, you're thinking about growth, you're thinking about becoming a unicorn, and so on. So suddenly all the conversations around, oh, I didn't get my increment, or my appraisal right, or my job is stressful, or I love my work, or I believe that this is a great company to be in and I'm so glad that I am, they just seem so alien to you. They just seem so out of the ordinary for you, because you're like, this is not how people are. Because my world is very far away from that, very far removed from it. And then worse, you have these stories that you keep feeding yourself, which is most people in a corporate job are unhappy, which may be true, by the way, but that is not the problem of the corporate job. That's a problem of the person and the job they are in, and that interconnection. There's nothing wrong with a job. What's wrong is they are in the wrong job. That doesn't make the concept of a corporate job wrong. And that's a big, big distinction to make. But because we can't make that distinction, we don't want to, because it becomes too complex for us to go through that. We're just saying, hey, most people in the world are unhappy in their jobs, so jobs are the reason for that. And that means everyone who signs up for a job out of college or perhaps some point in life are just selling themselves short. Because they could have gone and become cool and started their own company, but what they did was sold their soul and said, no, I'm going to become someone else's slave, listen to someone else's diktat. And then you have these quotes, which is, you either end up working for your own dream or you end up working for someone else's dream. And then it just amplifies your worldview. It just strengthens your belief that you see the world a certain way, and if the world is different from that, then that's the wrong way. And it all boils down to this one quote that I heard several years back, which has stayed with me. And the quote was, we know ourselves through our thoughts, but we know others through their actions. We know ourselves through our thoughts, but we know others through their actions. And I want you to pause on this quote for 10 seconds and think how deep this is. We know ourselves through our thoughts. Because we know our thoughts, we've heard them, we know ourselves through that. But others, we only get to know through their actions. We don't know what they're thinking, we don't know what's inside of them. So what they end up doing becomes our interpretation of them. And that's true for the other side as well. When the other side looks at us, they don't look at our thoughts, they look at our actions and thus form an opinion on us. So we, in our head, may be rationalizing it to the last decimal point. We were like, hey, the reason why I picked up this job, or the reason why I started this startup, or the reason why I made this decision in life was because A, B, C, X, Y, Z. You understand that, you have that in your thought, in your mind, in your emotions, but the other person just gets to see the outcome, the action. And they form an opinion of you through that, the same way that you form an opinion of them through their actions. And once I realized the depth and the gravity of this quote, it just changed so much for me, because now I know that while my natural intuition, my natural inclination, my natural urge will be to judge people, to categorize them, to generalize them, I don't know enough, because all I have seen is their action. And that's why I ask. I just ask. I never assume, I just ask. If there is anything on my mind, I see a certain person behaving in a certain way that perhaps is in conflict with what I think that person would be, I don't generalize, I just ask. As much as I care about it, I ask. And I'd encourage you to do the same thing. In life, don't assume. Try this crazy thing called asking. Because if you ask, you get to understand what's in their mind. That is the basis for them to know themselves. And if you didn't know of that, you'd only be judging them through their actions. By asking, you have taken the first step to understand their thoughts. And that will be a great step forward. Stay safe, and I hope you get to enjoy nature just as much as I am sitting in this wonderful place. All the best. To be notified of upcoming episodes, be sure to subscribe and follow the show on this app right now. Also, don't forget to rate and review the show, because that just feels nice. Thank you. If you like this podcast episode, then please remember to subscribe to the channel, because every week you will be notified.